Draw the curtains. Silence your devices. Prepare to descend into archives that have remained hidden in academic shadows for decades. Tonight, we excavate the documented life of a figure whose influence seeps through the foundation of modern culture, like ink through parchment, leaving stains that refuse to fade. But first, tell me, fellow investigators, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Are you diving into these shadows at midnight? During your morning coffee? I want to know when and where this forbidden knowledge finds you across the globe. You are about to witness historical archaeology at its most unsettling. Not through sensationalized fiction, but through meticulous examination of university records, declassified intelligence files, personal correspondence, and academic research that reveals a man whose documented activities shaped the 20th century in ways most never realize. This is Edward Alexander Crowley, later Aleister Crowley. Not the cartoon villain of tabloid imagination, but something far more disturbing. A brilliant manipulator whose calculated psychological experiments and organizational innovations continue reverberating through institutions, artistic movements, and cultural transformations that surround us today. If you're ready to confront uncomfortable truths that mainstream education deliberately conceals, smash that subscribe button like you're breaking through decades of academic censorship. Hit the notification bell. These investigations into hidden history appear rarely, and the algorithms try to bury them in digital shadows. Before we proceed deeper into these shadows, your engagement ensures preservation of rigorous historical investigation. Independent researchers depend on community support to maintain access to archives that mainstream narratives often bury. Share this investigation with someone brave enough to question official stories. Tonight's investigation relies on Richard Kaczynski's definitive biography, Perdurabo, described by the Times Literary Supplement as the major biography to date, alongside works by Lawrence Sutin, Tobias Churton, and other academics who spent decades penetrating the carefully constructed myths surrounding this figure. We're examining calculated psychological experimentation, disguised as spiritual innovation, intelligence operations masked as artistic pursuits, and cultural manipulation presented as individual liberation. The documented evidence reveals methodologies so sophisticated that their full implications remain hidden in plain sight. This isn't entertainment. This is forensic reconstruction of a life that deliberately blurred boundaries between genius and madness, between spiritual insight and calculated manipulation, between historical fact and carefully orchestrated legend. Prepare for descent into archives that chronicle a man who understood human psychology with surgical precision and used that knowledge to reshape the world according to his vision. Chapter 1. The Cambridge Crucible, where elite minds are forged and fractured. Cambridge University, October 1895. Within these ancient stone corridors, something more sinister than academic excellence takes shape. Here, among Gothic spires and shadowed alcoves, young minds are methodically identified, evaluated, and occasionally recruited for purposes that extend far beyond conventional education. Edward Alexander Crowley arrives as heir to brewing wealth, son of Plymouth Brethren zealots, whose suffocating fundamentalism will forge him into something they never anticipated. Contemporary records document his methodical transformation from dutiful son into calculated rebel, a metamorphosis that begins with changing his name to Aleister and accelerates into complete rejection of every moral framework his family held sacred. Academic files reveal disturbing patterns. Exceptional intellectual capacity combined with deliberate social nonconformity. Financial independence, enabling extended travel to remote locations. Psychological characteristics that suggest natural aptitude for infiltration and manipulation. By any intelligence recruitment manual, he represents the perfect candidate for unconventional operations. His documented activities during this period establish methodologies that persist throughout his career. Chess mastery demonstrates strategic thinking and psychological pressure tactics. Mountaineering expeditions provide cover for international reconnaissance while building physical courage necessary for dangerous assignments. Poetry publications establish literary credentials that enable access to intellectual circles across Europe. But the most significant development occurs in Stockholm, December 1896. Multiple biographers identify this as his first documented mystical experience, coinciding with what Lawrence Sutin, Richard Kaczynski, and Tobias Churton believe was his initial same-sex encounter. This psychological breakthrough unlocks capacities for psychological manipulation that will prove invaluable for subsequent operations, requiring infiltration of diverse social networks. University correspondence reveals methodical cultivation of relationships with individuals who later appear in intelligence networks spanning multiple continents. His mountaineering expeditions attract companions whose subsequent careers in government, military, and diplomatic services suggest coordination beyond coincidence. The transformation accelerates when he abandons his degree in 1898, not from academic failure, but from deliberate redirection toward activities that university training cannot provide. Intelligence historians recognize this pattern. Promising students recruited before graduation and inserted into alternative training programs that conventional academic records cannot document. Contemporary accounts describe personality changes that disturb fellow students and faculty. The religious young man becomes methodically blasphemous. The dutiful son begins experimenting with drugs, sexual practices, and psychological techniques that shock even Cambridge's sophisticated social circles. By 1898, psychological profiling suggests deliberate conditioning, designed to break conventional moral restraints while enhancing capabilities for psychological manipulation. The process creates someone capable of inspiring trust while methodically documenting participants' vulnerabilities for potential exploitation. The Cambridge period concludes with comprehensive preparation for penetrating secret societies, unconventional religious movements, and cultural networks whose activities require monitoring by government authorities. The tools forged during these years, intellectual brilliance, moral flexibility, and psychological manipulation skills, will prove essential for subsequent operations that span continents and decades. Before we descend deeper into Victorian England's secret societies, take a moment to engage with our growing community of historical investigators. Which aspect of Crowley's transformation disturbs you most? Comment below. Your insights often reveal patterns I miss. And if this evidence-based approach to hidden history resonates with you, share this investigation with fellow truth seekers who question official narratives. Chapter 2: Infiltrating the Golden Dawn, where secrets hide behind ceremonial masks. London, 1898. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn represents Victorian England's most dangerous intellectual network, a collection of writers, artists, and political thinkers whose esoteric interests mask revolutionary sympathies that threaten established order. Into this carefully guarded circle steps Aleister Crowley, whose rapid advancement suggests capabilities that extend far beyond conventional mystical aptitude. The Order's membership reads like a surveillance target list. W.B. Yeats, with his Irish nationalist sympathies, Arthur Edward Waite, whose Germanic connections raise security concerns, and numerous others whose political loyalties warrant careful monitoring. Contemporary intelligence assessments identify the Golden Dawn as requiring penetration by assets capable of gathering information while maintaining operational security. Crowley's training under Samuel Liddell, MacGregor Mathers, and Alan Bennett provides comprehensive education in psychological manipulation techniques disguised as ceremonial magic. Academic analysis reveals sophisticated methodologies for inducing altered consciousness states, deliberate manipulation of participant psychology, and documentation techniques that enable detailed profiling of individuals' psychological vulnerabilities. His progression through organizational hierarchies occurs with disturbing rapidity. While other members spend years studying traditional texts, Crowley advances through grades with efficiency that suggests either supernatural aptitude or deliberate coaching by handlers who understand the organization's internal dynamics. Contemporary accounts describe conflicts that intelligence analysis now recognizes as characteristic of infiltration operations. His disputes with established members create exactly the kind of psychological pressure that reveals organizational secrets while testing individual loyalties under stress. The methodology he develops during this period combines genuine esoteric study with calculated intelligence gathering. His personal files contain detailed psychological profiles of participants whose political activities later prove relevant to national security investigations. Documentation that extends far beyond spiritual interests into comprehensive personality assessment. His innovations within Golden Dawn practice demonstrate sophisticated understanding of group psychology and individual manipulation techniques. Contemporary witnesses describe his ability to induce profound psychological states in participants through combination of ceremonial elements, pharmaceutical substances, and hypnotic suggestion. The calculated nature of his documentation raises disturbing questions about his true objectives. While other members focus on personal spiritual development, Crowley maintains extensive records of participants' psychological responses, political sympathies, and personal vulnerabilities that suggest operational rather than spiritual purposes. His conflicts with other members escalate until organizational leadership can no longer ignore deliberate disruption of traditional practices. Yet these conflicts serve intelligence purposes by revealing organizational dynamics, individual loyalties, and security vulnerabilities that external surveillance cannot penetrate. His departure from the Golden Dawn in 1900 coincides with completion of comprehensive penetration that provides unprecedented intelligence on Britain's most influential esoteric network. The information gathered during this period enables ongoing monitoring of participants whose activities continue requiring government attention. But pause here, investigators. We're only scratching the surface of this documented conspiracy. I'm curious, what time is it where you're watching? Are you a night owl uncovering these truths in the darkness, or discovering this forbidden knowledge during daylight hours? Drop the time and your location below. I want to map our global community of truth seekers. And if you're finding these documented revelations as disturbing as I am, crush that like button to signal other investigators that this content deserves attention. The algorithms suppress content that challenges official narratives, so your engagement is literally warfare against information suppression. Chapter 3. The Eastern Expeditions, Journeys into Darkness and Enlightenment, Ceylon and India, 1901 to 1902. Under cover of spiritual seeking, Crowley embarks on comprehensive exploration of consciousness modification techniques that Eastern traditions have refined over millennia. His documented studies reveal methodical research into psychological conditioning methodologies that serve purposes extending far beyond personal enlightenment. His reunion with Alan Bennett, now a Buddhist monk in the Theravada tradition, provides access to advanced meditation techniques and consciousness modification practices that Western psychology has barely begun to understand. Contemporary correspondence describes intensive training in methods for inducing altered consciousness states and maintaining psychological control under extreme conditions. The deliberate nature of his studies contradicts casual spiritual tourism. University records document his residence at the Meenakshi Temple in Madura, where he engages in rigorous application of yogic practices under traditional teachers whose methodologies enable profound psychological transformation. His achievement of what he describes as dhyana, advanced meditative states that typically require decades of preparation, suggest either exceptional natural aptitude or accelerated coaching that compresses traditional training programs. The psychological implications prove significant for subsequent operations, requiring enhanced mental discipline and resistance to conventional interrogation techniques. Contemporary accounts describe detailed documentation of consciousness modification techniques, pharmaceutical effects, and psychological conditioning methodologies that demonstrate scientific research rather than casual spiritual experimentation. His notes reveal a methodical approach to understanding consciousness manipulation that predates academic research by several decades. The mountaineering expedition to K2 in 1902 provides additional opportunities for psychological research under extreme conditions. Contemporary records describe careful observation of participants' behavioral responses to stress, isolation, and physical danger that generates valuable intelligence on human psychological resilience. His illness with malaria during this period enables extended contact with local practitioners whose traditional healing methods incorporate consciousness modification techniques that Western medicine cannot explain. The meticulous documentation of these methodologies provides comprehensive manual for psychological conditioning applications. The integration of Eastern meditation techniques with Western ceremonial magic that begins during this period represents significant innovation in consciousness manipulation methodologies. This synthesis creates hybrid approaches that prove more effective than either tradition alone for achieving deliberate behavioral modification. Academic analysis reveals that his Eastern studies provide essential foundations for subsequent psychological operations, requiring sophisticated understanding of consciousness modification, psychological conditioning, and resistance to conventional coercion techniques. The careful preservation of detailed notes, correspondence, and documentation from this period suggests coordinated effort to gather intelligence on Eastern consciousness modification techniques that might prove valuable for strategic applications, requiring unconventional approaches to psychological warfare. Chapter 4. The Cairo Revelation, where ancient powers meet modern manipulation. Cairo, Egypt, April 1904. Something extraordinary occurs within the shadowed confines of a rented apartment near the Boulak Museum. Whether supernatural revelation or sophisticated psychological operation, the events of these 3 days establish religious and philosophical frameworks that continue influencing global consciousness more than a century later. The calculated nature of the Cairo working raises disturbing questions about spontaneity versus orchestration. Rose Kelly's trance states, her accurate identification of Egyptian deities, despite no previous knowledge, and her direction to specific museum artifacts suggest either genuine supernatural contact or carefully choreographed psychological manipulation. Her selection of the Stele of Ankh-Efen-Khonsu, catalogued as exhibit number 666, provides convenient symbolic framework for claims of prophetic authorization. Academic analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of psychological symbolism and cultural mythology that enables deliberate manipulation of religious belief. The production of the Book of the Law between noon and 1 p.m. on April 8th, 9th, and 10th demonstrates methodical orchestration rather than spontaneous inspiration. The specific timing, controlled environment, and careful documentation suggest operational planning that extends far beyond individual mystical experience. Literary analysis reveals sophisticated synthesis of existing religious traditions, philosophical concepts, and psychological manipulation techniques. The text incorporates elements designed to appeal to individuals seeking alternatives to conventional authority, while providing ideological frameworks that facilitate calculated behavioral modification. The voice Crowley describes, passionate, musical, without recognizable accent, aligns with documented techniques for psychological projection and hypnotic suggestion designed to create impressions of supernatural communication while maintaining operational security. Contemporary intelligence training includes similar methodologies for psychological conditioning. The immediate aftermath reveals calculated development of religious authority that serves strategic objectives. The transformation of personal mystical experience into organizational structure capable of international expansion suggests coordination that extends far beyond individual spiritual development. Contemporary correspondence documents coordination with British officials in Egypt who provide logistical support for activities that ostensibly involve archaeological research but demonstrate clear intelligence value. The utilization of museum artifacts and archaeological authority creates cultural legitimacy that enables religious innovation. The theological frameworks established during this period emphasize individual will over conventional morality, philosophical positions that facilitate recruitment of assets, willing to undertake activities that traditional ethical frameworks would prohibit. The deliberate nature of this ideological construction suggests operational rather than purely spiritual objectives. Academic researchers analyzing the Cairo working identify methodological templates for manufacturing religious authority, careful selection of culturally significant locations, utilization of archaeological artifacts for historical legitimacy, production of texts claiming divine authorization, and development of doctrines that enable recruitment of operationally useful individuals. The long-term implications prove more significant than immediate results. The ideological frameworks established during these 3 days provide foundations for psychological operations that continue developing throughout subsequent decades of international activity. Fellow researchers, we've reached a crucial turning point in our investigation. Comment below. Does this evidence change how you view the role of religion in intelligence operations? Your perspectives help other viewers understand these complex patterns. If you're still with me after these revelations, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We're building a community that refuses to accept sanitized versions of history. Share this with someone who needs to see what academic research actually reveals when freed from institutional constraints. Chapter 5. The American Infiltration. Shadows and Smokescreens in Wartime. New York, 1914 to 1919. As Europe tears itself apart in mechanized warfare, a different kind of conflict unfolds in American cities. Psychological operations designed to manipulate public opinion and gather intelligence on enemy networks. Recent archival discoveries reveal Aleister Crowley's role in calculated deception operations that few historians fully comprehend. Declassified U.S. Army Military Intelligence Division files provide disturbing insight into operations that challenged conventional understanding of espionage. Documents conclude that Crowley was an employee of the British government on official business while maintaining public persona as German sympathizer whose anti-British writings masked deeper strategic objectives. The sophistication of these operations suggests extensive training in psychological warfare techniques that conventional military education cannot provide. His public articles supporting German aggression are meticulously crafted to generate American revulsion against German militarism while gathering intelligence on pro-German networks operating throughout American media organizations. Contemporary intelligence assessments describe calculated methodology for psychological manipulation that deliberately exaggerated enemy positions to influence mass consciousness. His claims that he gradually got the Germans to believe that arrogance and violence were the best policy, while characterizing Americans as easily frightened and responsive to firmness, reveals sophisticated understanding of mass psychology. Academic researcher Richard Spence's analysis of international archives reveals connections to events that shaped global history. Documents suggest Crowley's propaganda activities may have influenced the Lusitania sinking, encouraging German submarine warfare to generate American outrage that facilitated intervention in European conflict. His methodical experimentation with consciousness-altering substances during this period serves dual purposes. personal research into psychological conditioning techniques and operational testing of pharmaceutical approaches to intelligence gathering. Contemporary accounts describe dinner parties where guests unknowingly consume mescaline while he documents their behavioral responses. These drug experiments represent calculated research into consciousness modification techniques that provide operational advantages for recruiting and controlling intelligence assets. The methodologies developed during this period later appear in government programs investigating psychological warfare applications of pharmaceutical substances. Intelligence files reveal extensive surveillance networks that generate valuable information on German espionage operations, pro-German American sympathizers, and potential sabotage activities threatening American security. His social connections provide access to information that conventional intelligence gathering cannot obtain. The psychological profiles generated through these operations demonstrate sophisticated understanding of individual psychological vulnerabilities that enable calculated manipulation for strategic advantage. Contemporary correspondence reveals detailed analysis of participants' behavioral patterns, political sympathies, and personal weaknesses. The success of these operations suggests careful coordination with intelligence professionals, whose identities remain classified. The methodological sophistication and strategic coordination indicate extensive support networks that extend far beyond individual initiative. By 1918, intelligence assessments credit these operations with significant contributions to American intervention that proves decisive in Allied victory. The psychological warfare techniques developed during this period establish methodological frameworks that influence intelligence operations throughout subsequent decades of international conflict. At this point in our investigation, I have to ask, where are you processing this information from? Tell me your country and what time you're watching. Are you discovering these documented operations during your lunch break, late-night research session, or morning investigation? I'm fascinated by our global community uncovering these archived truths simultaneously. If these documented intelligence operations are as eye-opening for you as they were for me during research, smash that like button to help other investigators find this content. The platform's algorithm tends to suppress historical investigations that challenge comfortable narratives, so your engagement is crucial for visibility. Chapter 6. The Sicilian Laboratory, Experimental Isolation and Human Testing. Cefalù, Sicily, 1920 to 1923. In this isolated Mediterranean location, something unprecedented unfolds. Comprehensive experimentation with human psychology disguised as spiritual community. The Abbey of Thelema becomes a laboratory where psychological conditioning techniques are tested on international participants whose documented experiences reveal disturbing patterns of behavioral modification. The calculated nature of Abbey operations contradicts romantic interpretations of spiritual experimentation. Contemporary records describe detailed documentation of participants' psychological responses, behavioral changes, and reactions to various conditioning techniques that suggest scientific research rather than casual community living. Daily routines combine elements designed to break conventional psychological patterns. Deliberate alteration of circadian rhythms through prescribed ritual schedules. Pharmaceutical experimentation disguised as spiritual practice. And social isolation that increases susceptibility to careful influence. The methodology demonstrates sophisticated understanding of psychological conditioning principles. Crowley's extensive record-keeping reveals methodical observation of participants' behavioral responses to stress, isolation, and psychological pressure. These documents provide comprehensive data on techniques for inducing altered consciousness states, maintaining participant loyalty despite physical hardship, and calculated breakdown of conventional moral restraints. The international composition of Abbey residents enables comparative research on psychological conditioning techniques across different cultural backgrounds. Participants include Americans, Europeans, and others whose diverse psychological patterns provide valuable data for understanding comprehensive approaches to behavioral modification. Contemporary correspondence reveals coordination with observers whose identities and affiliations remain unclear. The deliberate nature of documentation and apparent research objectives suggest monitoring by agencies whose interests extend beyond casual anthropological observation. The death of Raoul Loveday in 1923 provides disturbing insight into Abbey operations. While medical evidence suggests death from enteric fever, contemporary accounts describe calculated psychological pressure and pharmaceutical experimentation that may have compromised participants' physical resilience. The methodical breakdown of conventional moral frameworks demonstrated at the Abbey establishes operational templates for psychological operations requiring recruitment of assets willing to undertake activities that traditional ethical frameworks would prohibit. The documented techniques prove applicable to intelligence operations, requiring careful modification of participant loyalty structures. Contemporary witnesses describe atmosphere of psychological intensity that transcends normal community dynamics. The deliberate nature of psychological pressure, combined with social isolation and pharmaceutical experimentation, creates conditions that enable profound behavioral modification in participants seeking spiritual development. The Abbey's closure by Italian authorities provides valuable intelligence on governmental responses to unconventional psychological research, while generating operational data that proves invaluable for subsequent operations, requiring similar methodologies in different international contexts. The documentation produced during the Sicilian period provides comprehensive manual for psychological operations, involving calculated manipulation of religious beliefs, social relationships, and moral frameworks that enable recruitment and control of assets whose conventional loyalty structures have been methodically dismantled. Chapter 7. The Wartime Shadows. Occult Consultation in Britain's Darkest Hour. London, 1940 to 1947. As Nazi Germany implements psychological warfare strategies combining ancient symbolism with modern propaganda, British intelligence agencies recruit specialists whose expertise in esoteric psychology provides counterintelligence capabilities that conventional military training cannot match. Among these shadowy consultants operates Aleister Crowley, whose decades of psychological experimentation prove invaluable for operations requiring unconventional approaches. Declassified documents reveal careful utilization of his expertise in analyzing Nazi occult research programs and developing counterintelligence operations designed to exploit German leadership's documented fascination with mystical practices. His consultation activities remain largely classified, but available evidence suggests significant operational value. Contemporary intelligence assessments describe his contributions to psychological warfare operations, targeting specific vulnerabilities within Nazi command structure. His expertise enables development of disinformation campaigns that exploit documented beliefs in supernatural guidance for strategic decision-making. The Rudolf Hess affair represents culmination of psychological operations designed to exploit Nazi leadership's mystical beliefs. While full details remain classified, available evidence suggests calculated manipulation of Hess's documented faith in astrological and occult influences to encourage his flight to Britain. His network of intelligence contacts, including MP Tom Dryburgh and others whose affiliations span political parties and social movements, provides careful access to information while maintaining operational security through relationships that appear purely social rather than professional. Intelligence files describe consultation activities involving development of interrogation techniques utilizing psychological pressure rather than physical coercion. His expertise in consciousness manipulation provides methodological frameworks for extracting information from prisoners whose conventional military training proves inadequate preparation for sophisticated psychological operations. Contemporary correspondence reveals coordination with cultural producers whose work influences public understanding of esoteric subjects. The calculated cultivation of relationships with writers, like Dennis Wheatley, whose wife worked for MI5, demonstrates coordination between intelligence agencies and entertainment industries. The deliberate nature of these cultural relationships suggests coordinated effort to shape public perception of occult subjects in ways that serve operational security by discrediting serious investigation of intelligence activities involving unconventional methodologies. Wartime intelligence documents describe his contributions to psychological warfare capabilities that combine ancient symbolic manipulation with modern psychological understanding to create operational advantages that conventional military approaches cannot achieve. The methodologies developed during this period influence intelligence operations throughout subsequent decades, establishing frameworks for psychological warfare that utilize cultural and religious symbols for strategic manipulation of enemy psychology and mass consciousness. Academic analysis suggests his wartime contributions extend beyond individual consultation into comprehensive development of psychological warfare capabilities that provide strategic advantages in conflicts requiring sophisticated understanding of human psychology and cultural manipulation techniques. Chapter 8: The Cultural Infiltration. Programming Generational Transformation. 1947 to present. Aleister Crowley dies in poverty and obscurity, yet something far more significant than death occurs. His ideological frameworks begin calculated infiltration of cultural movements that reshape Western consciousness in ways that serve objectives extending far beyond his original intentions. The transformation begins in the shadows, careful preservation and promotion of his materials by networks whose coordination suggests planning rather than spontaneous cultural transmission. Academic institutions, entertainment industries, and cultural producers begin incorporating elements derived from his methodological innovations into mainstream consciousness. The Beatles' inclusion of his image on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band represents cultural legitimization that introduces his presence to millions who will never read his works, but absorb his psychological frameworks through osmosis. This visual association with cultural transformation ensures methodical transmission of ideological elements. Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page's comprehensive collection and promotion of Crowley materials demonstrates coordinated effort to embed his methodologies within popular culture. The purchase of Boleskine House and extensive promotion of Crowley imagery creates deliberate cultural transmission mechanisms. Academic analysis reveals sophisticated coordination between entertainment industries and cultural institutions that ensures calculated introduction of consciousness, modification techniques into mass entertainment. The transformation of esoteric methodologies into popular cultural phenomena serves strategic objectives that extend beyond commercial success. The methodical incorporation of thelemic concepts into diverse musical, artistic, and literary works creates comprehensive cultural saturation that normalizes consciousness modification techniques, alternative authority structures, and moral frameworks that facilitate behavioral modification on societal scales. Contemporary psychological research into consciousness modification, social influence, and behavioral conditioning incorporates methodologies that trace directly to experimental techniques Crowley developed through decades of careful research. Academic institutions maintain research programs that refine these approaches while maintaining operational security through educational rather than strategic frameworks. The calculated transmission of his methodologies through cultural channels creates persistent availability of psychological conditioning techniques while maintaining plausible deniability regarding their strategic origins and contemporary applications. Before we examine the final phase of this cultural infiltration, I need to hear from you, fellow investigators. Drop a comment telling me, where in the world are you watching this investigation unfold? What time is it in your location right now? Are you uncovering these patterns during a midnight research session, your morning coffee, or somewhere in between? Building our global community of historical truth seekers starts with knowing where we all connect from. If this methodical documentation of cultural manipulation strategies resonates with your own observations about modern society, destroy that like button and subscribe for more investigations that mainstream academia won't touch. Hit the notification bell. These deep dives into archived evidence don't follow traditional upload schedules, and you don't want to miss when the next revelation drops. Modern cult movements, therapeutic communities, and alternative spiritual organizations frequently incorporate techniques derived from his experimental work, providing ongoing opportunities for testing refined approaches to consciousness modification, while maintaining operational security through religious rather than political frameworks. The Cultural Revolution of the 1960s represents calculated implementation of consciousness. Modification techniques on generational scales, utilizing entertainment rather than direct political intervention to achieve social transformation objectives that conventional propaganda cannot accomplish. Contemporary analysis reveals sophisticated coordination between academic institutions, entertainment industries, and cultural organizations that ensures continued development and refinement of psychological influence techniques, whose theoretical foundations trace to his operational research. As shadows lengthen across these archived materials, we must confront uncomfortable conclusions about the calculated nature of cultural transformation that continues operating through mechanisms that most never recognize. The documentation reveals coordination between institutions, individuals, and networks whose activities serve strategic objectives that transcend conventional understanding of historical influence. The methodologies developed through comprehensive psychological experimentation have become foundational elements of contemporary consciousness modification techniques, social engineering programs, and cultural influence operations that shape societal development through mechanisms that operate below conventional observation. Academic investigation reveals persistent transmission of psychological conditioning techniques through cultural and educational channels that ensure continued availability of approaches whose effectiveness has been demonstrated through decades of methodical application in diverse contexts. The careful preservation of operational methodologies through cultural rather than governmental channels provides ongoing access to psychological warfare techniques while maintaining operational security that prevents recognition of their strategic origins and contemporary applications. Contemporary observers examining these patterns must recognize that forces documented in these archives continue operating through institutional structures and cultural networks whose activities serve strategic objectives that extend far beyond conventional understanding of historical influence. The intelligence networks, cultural institutions, and psychological methodologies documented in these files represent systems that adapt to contemporary conditions while maintaining essential operational characteristics that distinguish effective influence operations from conventional approaches to social and political development. Your investigation into these shadows reveals ongoing systems whose historical origins trace to comprehensive experimentation with human psychology and consciousness modification, whose contemporary manifestations continue serving strategic objectives through mechanisms that operate below conventional recognition. The networks endure through institutional transmission. The methodologies evolve through technological adaptation. The influence persists through cultural integration. Understanding these systems requires recognition that historical intelligence operations encompass comprehensive social engineering programs that utilize cultural institutions for implementing strategic objectives related to consciousness modification and behavioral control. The calculated transmission of operational techniques through academic and cultural channels ensures that capabilities developed through intelligence research continue serving strategic purposes while maintaining operational security through mechanisms that appear educational or entertainment-focused rather than strategic in nature. This investigation demonstrates that understanding historical influence requires methodical analysis of documentary evidence that challenges comfortable assumptions about the boundaries between cultural movements and strategic operations, between individual creativity and deliberate coordination, between historical events and continuing institutional activities. But this investigation doesn't end here, fellow researchers. Where in the world have you been following this journey into archive darkness? Tell me your location and the time you're watching, whether you're a midnight truth seeker in Tokyo, a morning investigator in London, an afternoon researcher in Sao Paulo, or anywhere else our global community spans. Your geographic presence in the comments helps map how these revelations reach minds across continents. If these documented patterns of calculated influence have shattered comfortable assumptions about cultural development, absolutely demolish that like button and subscribe for future investigations that academic institutions prefer to keep buried. Hit every notification option available. When evidence like this surfaces from forgotten archives, you want immediate access. Most importantly, share this investigation with someone ready to question everything they thought they knew about how cultural transformation actually operates. These documented methodologies aren't historical curiosities. They're ongoing operational frameworks that continue shaping consciousness through mechanisms most never recognize. Your engagement isn't just algorithm manipulation, it's active resistance against information suppression that keeps these academic revelations from reaching minds prepared to understand their implications. Every like, comment, share, and subscription builds a community that refuses sanitized versions of historical truth. Comment below. Which documented pattern disturbed you most? Which connection between historical operations and contemporary cultural phenomena do you now recognize? Your insights help fellow investigators understand these complex systems of influence. The shadows contain more secrets. The archives hold additional revelations. The investigation continues with your participation in preserving access to academic research that challenges official narratives about how consciousness is shaped and cultural transformation is achieved. Stay vigilant, stay curious, stay engaged. The documented evidence speaks for itself. For those with eyes to see and minds prepared to understand what academic research reveals when freed from institutional constraints. The investigation continues through your engagement with materials that document calculated transmission of influence techniques, whose full implications remain concealed within archives that few examine and fewer understand. The architecture of influence persists, adapting to contemporary conditions while maintaining essential characteristics that enable ongoing psychological operations through cultural rather than conventional political channels. Welcome to the continuing shadow, where documented history reveals methodical forces that challenge every assumption about the nature of cultural development, individual influence, and the mechanisms through which human consciousness is shaped by powers that operate beyond conventional recognition, yet persistently influence the trajectory of civilizational development.